The comic book industry is in ruins at the moment. The direct market, the mainstream market. We've got artists, etc., drawing pictures for comic shops in an effort to auction them off and keep their doors open. When ultimately, comic shops don't need charity. Comic shops need business. They need product to sell. Product which the customer is going to lap up. And that is where the mainstream market have been letting them down for years and years. But yesterday, the comic book industry had a colossal win. The likes that they have never seen before. The trouble is, you're never going to hear about it. You're never going to hear the mainstream media in the industry talk about it. Why is that? Hi everyone, it's Az here from HeelvsBabyface. So approximately a week ago, I think last Thursday, I had former DC and Marvel artist and writer Ethan Van Sciver, the creator of Cyberfrog, which you can see on the screen there. And we were discussing his, well, to start with at least, forceful removal from the mainstream comic book industry. And it was pretty much based on his politics. That seemed to be the crux of it. But not only did they want to get rid of him because he was an outspoken Trump supporter, and of course, with 50% of America being the same way, that's just not the done thing for this industry at all. No, out the door you go. No, they also conspired with the mainstream comic media to try and brand him a Nazi. Because the industry seems to have a bunch of pathetic, petty people in it who just want to push their own politics and behave as if the industry, which is there to make money, is some kind of childish school playground. It's no wonder it's in the mess it's in at the moment. And so he was forced out and decided to go to crowdfunding platforms to take his own product, his own creation, Cyberfrog, and release a comic. And be aware that crowdfunding is part of the comic book industry, but you won't see their products in stores. And why is that? Because the comic book direct market has gate-kept them out. They have made conscious efforts to put pressure on comic book stores not to stock their comics, and therefore have made crowdfunding projects say, well, we can't run the risk of having a middleman, so we are just going to fulfill directly to the customer. And all that does is make their projects far richer for them, cutting out around about 60% in money which would go elsewhere. Creating a YouTube channel, doing silly little videos about Star Wars and Rose Tico, building an audience that people liked. People flocked to the channel to listen to the live streams and be entertained. He built up a camaraderie with the potential customer when this comic was going to come out. Meanwhile, mainstream comic book writers and artists are taking to Twitter to tell their customers to fuck off if they voted a certain way, or if they dare dislike a product or criticised a product, be branded an ist or an ism or a phobe, because they didn't care about business. They didn't care about making money. They didn't care about the customer. They were only interested in pushing their own ideology. Hell, Marvel Comics has Sama Amanot at the head. That is somebody who has no experience in comics whatsoever and quite clearly is pushing her own agenda. These industries do not want to make money. Clearly. Gail Simone saying that the comic book industry customer is able-bodied, cis, white, hetero, male, and the industry could afford to push some of these out of the door. Well, they couldn't, because as soon as COVID came around, the industry died in 2 weeks because of the piss-poor distribution setup that they had, and for the fact that they had been flocking the market, just flooding it with unsellable crap for so long that the brunt was brought by the brick and mortar stores. And so when this came around, they couldn't cope because they were literally living month to month on new comic sales. Meanwhile, their shelves just got overinflated with unsellable shite. So, when Ethan took to crowdfunding and put Cyberfrog Blood Honey up, his campaign, in its initial period before demand, raised £429,000, which equates to $538,500. It was the biggest crowdfunded comic to date at that time. It then went on in demand and sales on eBay of the comics to raise $1.2 million, a singular comic. Unprecedented. But mainstream press kept quiet. You wouldn't have known, you wouldn't have heard, because they didn't report on it. Why? Because it wasn't the direct market, and Ethan, he wasn't somebody that they wanted to give publicity or press to. He was somebody that was constantly under attack, and remains to today. So, the campaign is a monumental success. Currently, all the campaigns that he's run have raised now over $2 million in just under 2 years. It's absolutely amazing. Now, that didn't mean that everything was absolutely plain sailing. The comic itself was approximately a year late. It was due for release in November 2018, and it didn't see light of day in the domestic market in America until September 2019, and then I myself didn't get my copy until December 2019, so just over a year late, being international. Imagine we get shipped last. There were various reasons, but the comic itself was actually expanded upon, which proved to be the biggest. It was expanded and made larger. When it arrived, well received. I personally enjoyed the comic a lot. It was a big throwback to me to 1990s comics. I liked the flow of it, and I was really into the magazine, that when I actually got to the final page and turned over and that was it, I was, I want more. I want more, which is always a good thing. When a product leaves you wanting more, when somebody leaves you wanting more. So he creates Cyberfrog 2 Wreck Planet, which is going to be the second in a 4-part series, and released that 30 days ago. This is a snapshot from the campaign with 16 hours left to go yesterday. It had taken £455,719, which equated to $572,000. So in comparison to the first campaign, which took 538.5, with a little bit of time left, with just less than a day left, 572,000. Now, again, not everything was tickety-boo. The first campaign had 8,500 backers, whereas this campaign had dipped to around about 5,000 backers. And when the 16 hours were up, The campaign was around $607,000. The most raised by a comic in crowdfunding in a 30-day period. A new record, with approximately 5,200 backers. So although there was a loss of backers, the money per customer had ramped up significantly and not only compensated for that loss, but elevated it to the tune of another $80,000 on the total. This is absolutely incredible stuff. Are you going to hear about it in the now legitimized Bleeding Cool, an absolute rag that the mainstream industry dismissed, but as soon as they started jumping all over Ethan and Richard C. Mayer, etc., suddenly they gave it legitimacy. No, of course you're not. Of course you're not. Because it doesn't play to the tune of the mainstream market. The mainstream market, which is burning. Now, I saw a tweet from Comicstorian the other day. I don't know the person. From what I hear, very well liked, very well respected. And they put out, I thought, quite a tone-deaf tweet saying, if you think that the comic industry or comics are dead, then you're a moron. The comic industry is changing. Well, the comic mainstream, the direct market is what people are talking about. They're not talking about comics in general because, as we can see right here, in crowdfunding, you get the support of customers. You build your own brand and get people to come to you, and then you sell them your product. You can make incredible money. Incredible money. So comics aren't dead, but the direct market is burning to the ground. We've got Jim Lee drawing sketches to auction off for charity. And others are now joining in to try and keep comic shops alive. Comic shops need business. They need sustainable product. They need good product. They don't need incel twins. They don't need Cyclops and Wolverine rutting on the moon. They don't need Asian Bruce Wayne or now gay Alfred. These are the ideas of a bankrupt industry. We can't think of anything. Let's race change. Let's sexuality change. Let's gender change. Lazy. Absolutely lazy. So I don't think people are morons for saying the direct market is dead, because it is clearly, when you have your big hitters like Jim Lee trying to prop it up through charity, where you've got Nerdrotic and Richard C. Mayer trying to raise money to keep comic shops open because they can't remain open. Who is to blame for that? The mainstream market for giving them unsellable shit. The industry isn't changing. The industry has had change thrust upon it. And that is completely different. The industry didn't transition now. The industry didn't say, hey, look, we've got to think about moving away from Diamond or adding 2 other distribution chains. We need to think about getting rid of this tat, this constant regeneration of unsellable titles because they tick a box or they hit a political agenda which we get behind, instead of thinking, what does the customer want? What does the customer that Gail Simone said the industry could lose, that was propping it up, need? Because the industry clearly needed them. No, they weren't thinking that. They had to wait until this event happened to just expedite the inevitable, and the industry came down. So the industry isn't changing. The industry has had change thrust upon it. And that is completely different, because that was something that was forced on them, not something they were ever looking to do. Marvel would have been quite happy to just flood the shelves with unsellable shite. Here, have some Children of the Atom. Here, have some New Warriors. DC here, have some Gotham High. And God knows what else they have got planned for this absolute shockingly shite industry right now. But here, we got somebody on one singular comic making $607,000 in 30 days, and you're never going to hear about it. You're never going to hear about it from the mainstream. This is one of the weirdest industries I've ever known. It's crazy. It's on course to become the biggest crowdfunded comic in 60 days, if manages to keep up this pace. I think the next target is $814,000 in the next 30 days. I mean, that means it's an extra $214,000 in that time. Very possible. Silence. It's okay. They'll just continue to attack. They'll just continue to make up shit. They'll just continue to brand ismphobe in an effort to pull somebody down that is doing what they dream they could do. This industry must be dripping with jealousy right now. Dripping. They did it to themselves. They did it to themselves. So I hope you enjoyed the vid. If you did, do give it a thumbs up and also subscribe to the channel. Follow me on social media and Twitch for live streaming links. They are in the description box down below, although my live streaming is now on YouTube, so forget that. And I'll be back with some more stuff very soon. You take care. Bye for now.